Imagine a quiet, peaceful town in Kerala, a place where faith is a way of life, and a young nun devotes herself to God, her studies, and her community. But on one fateful day in 1992, that peace was shattered forever. Sister Abaya was found dead in a convent well, her life cut short, leaving behind a chilling mystery that would haunt the town for nearly 3 decades. But what happened to her that night? And why did it take 28 years to finally uncover the truth? Kotam, a serene town nestled deep in the lush landscapes of Kerala, was a place defined by its faith. The community's identity revolved around the vibrant Christian presence that touched every corner of daily life. Churches and convents dotted the town, each serving as a hub for spiritual gatherings and community events, with nuns and priests at the heart of this close-knit society. In Kotam, faith wasn't just practiced, it was lived, woven into the fabric of every moment. But beneath this tranquil surface, something darker was brewing. At the heart of Kotam's religious community was the St. Pius X Convent, a sanctuary of devotion and discipline. It was here that Sister Abaya lived, a young woman known for her quiet dedication to God and her studies. From the outside, the convent seemed a place of peace, a beacon of faith in an otherwise ordinary town. But for Sister Abhaya, what should have been a place of refuge would soon become the site of her tragic death. Behind the walls of that convent, undercurrents of secrecy began to swirl, hinting at a web of lies that would slowly unravel over the years. Abhaya's death didn't just shake Kotam, it sent shockwaves throughout Kerala and beyond. Her lifeless body found at the bottom of a well was an image that haunted the minds of all who knew her. How could something so horrific happen in a place of worship? At first it seemed like an unspeakable tragedy, an accident, or perhaps even suicide. But as time passed, questions began to surface, and whispers of foul play grew louder. The more people asked, the more the answers didn't quite add up. What had really happened that night? Sister Abaya was just 21 years old at the time of her death, a young woman brimming with promise and deeply committed to her calling. From an early age, she felt the pull of her faith, dedicating herself to a life of service. Her days were filled with prayer, community service, and study, reflecting her desire to excel both spiritually and academically. To those around her, Abhaya embodied everything a nun should be: compassionate, selfless, and driven by a deep love for others. She believed that knowledge was her path to spreading the teachings of Christ, and she embraced every challenge that came her way, no matter how overwhelming. But there was more to Sister Abaya's story. Life in the convent wasn't without its pressures. The expectations placed on her by both her mentors and peers weighed heavily on her shoulders. The balance between her spiritual duties and her academic ambitions sometimes felt like a tightrope she had to walk alone. Still, Abhaya remained steadfast. Her faith never wavered, and she was always willing to lend a hand to those in need. But beneath the surface, something was amiss. On that fateful morning in March 1992, the convent was thrown into chaos when Sister Abaya failed to appear for morning prayers. The nuns, accustomed to her disciplined routine, knew immediately that something was wrong. As they searched for her, calling her name through the halls of the convent and the surrounding grounds, a sense of dread began to settle in. Hours passed, and still no sign of her. The anxiety grew, until the unimaginable happened. Sister Abaya's body was discovered in the convent's well. The scene was shocking. The well, once a source of life-giving water, had become the site of a grisly discovery. What had started as a routine morning had now turned into a nightmare for the nuns of St. Pius VI. The discovery of Abhaya's lifeless body set off a chain of events that would span nearly 3 decades. An investigation plagued by twists, dead ends, and disturbing revelations that would shake not only the town of Kotam, but the entire religious institution that surrounded it. At first, local authorities were quick to rule Abhaya's death a suicide, a conclusion that left many in the community in shock. How could someone so devoted, so committed to her faith, take her own life? The nuns and priests who knew her best couldn't reconcile this verdict with the person they had known. She had shown no signs of despair, no hints of the inner turmoil that might lead to such a tragic decision. Was this truly the end of the story? Or was there something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? As doubts began to swirl, so did rumors. Could there have been foul play? And if so, who had something to hide? The more the investigation continued, the more tangled the web of secrecy became. As years passed, what was once a quiet tragedy became a public spectacle, with the media and the community demanding answers that seemed increasingly out of reach. Despite the initial ruling, Abaya's family and supporters refused to accept the idea of suicide. They pushed for further inquiries, determined to uncover the truth. It wasn't until 2020, 28 long years after her death, that a breakthrough finally emerged, leading to the arrest of 2 priests and a fellow nun. But this resolution, though welcome, didn't erase the anguish of nearly 3 decades of uncertainty. For the people of Kotam and for all those who followed the case, it raised more questions than it answered. What secrets had been buried along with Sister Abhaya? And why had it taken so long for the truth to come to light? But even with arrests made and the case seemingly closed, the question still lingers. What really happened to Sister Abaya that night? And why did those closest to her try to keep it hidden for so long? Sister Abaya was known for her unwavering commitment to her routine, an unbreakable daily structure that revolved around her faith and studies. Each morning, she would rise long before the sun, cloaked in the quiet darkness of pre-dawn hours. Her first moments of the day were always spent in prayer, seeking spiritual strength for the challenges ahead. After her time with God, she would dive into her academic pursuits, focused and determined to excel in her studies. For Sister Abhaya, these early hours were sacred, a time of solitude where she found peace and purpose. But on that fateful day in March 1992, something was terribly wrong. As the early morning routine began to unfold, the nuns noticed an unsettling absence. Sister Abhaya had not arrived for morning prayers, a ritual she had never missed. Concern rippled through the convent, quiet whispers growing louder as the minutes ticked by. Where was Sister Abhaya? This wasn't like her. She was always the first to rise, the first to devote herself to her spiritual duties. At first, the nuns searched the familiar halls and grounds of the convent, expecting to find her deep in study or prayer. But as time passed, anxiety began to settle in like a cold shadow. There was no sign of her. The search expanded, with local residents joining the effort, combing through every corner of the convent and its surroundings. Her name echoed through the peaceful, quiet morning. Abhaya? Sister Abaya? But there was no response. The calm serenity of the convent grounds was replaced by a mounting sense of dread. As hours passed and still no trace of her was found, that sense of unease transformed into something far more frightening. Panic set in. Everyone feared the worst, but no one was prepared for what would come next. Later that day, a nun's scream pierced the air. The kind of scream that could only mean something unthinkable had happened. And indeed, it had. Sister Abaya's lifeless body was discovered at the bottom of the convent well, submerged in the cold, dark water. The well, once a symbol of life, now held the chilling remains of a tragedy that would haunt the community for decades to come. The shock of her death hit the convent like a tidal wave. In an instant, the peaceful sanctuary that had been home to so many devoted nuns was shattered. The horror of what had been found set off a storm of grief, confusion and disbelief. How could this have happened? And more urgently, why? The discovery of Sister Abaya's body marked the beginning of a long and complicated investigation, one that would unravel a web of secrets, deceit, and betrayal far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The investigation into Sister Abaya's tragic death was quickly handed over to local police officer Vivi Augustine. A seasoned investigator, Augustine knew the weight of the task ahead of him. This wasn't just any case. The community was grieving, desperate for answers, and the media had already begun circling like vultures. The public wanted to know what had happened to their beloved Sister Abaya, and they wanted to know fast. Augustine began by meticulously piecing together the events leading up to her disappearance. Witnesses were interviewed, evidence was collected, and an autopsy was conducted to determine the cause of death. It didn't take long for the first major conclusion to be reached. The autopsy revealed that Sister Abaya had drowned. Based on this, authorities made an initial ruling: suicide. But this determination was met with immediate and fierce resistance from the community. How could a nun, so deeply rooted in her faith and so committed to her calling, take her own life? The community refused to believe it. Sister Abaya was known for her vibrant spirit, her dedication to serving others, and her unwavering devotion to God. For those who knew her best, the suicide ruling made no sense. Her family, friends, and fellow nuns all shared the same disbelief. Sister Abaya would never have done this to herself. Something else must have happened. As whispers of foul play began to spread, so did skepticism about the investigation itself. Was there something more behind Sister Abaya's death that the authorities were missing, or worse, ignoring? The initial conclusion that her death was a suicide quickly crumbled under the weight of public outcry. The people of Kotam demanded more than a rushed explanation. They wanted answers. They wanted justice. The community's outrage only grew as more details of the investigation came to light. Why had the authorities been so quick to close the case? What about the inconsistencies, the missing pieces of evidence? The more questions that were asked, the fewer answers were given, and the public began to suspect something far more sinister. Was this simply a case of a tragic suicide, or was there a deliberate cover-up at play? But as pressure mounted, the authorities remained steadfast in their initial ruling. It would take years, decades even, before the full truth began to emerge. And when it finally did, it would shake the very foundations of trust within the community. The shocking truth behind Sister Abaya's death was more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The shockwaves from Sister Abaya's death reverberated far beyond the convent walls. For the people of Kotam, this wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a communal wound, one that cut deep into the heart of their faith and trust. At first, there was only grief. The loss of such a young, vibrant soul left the community grappling for answers. How could something so horrific happen to someone so devoted? And why, despite all the questions, were authorities so quick to label her death a suicide? Grief quickly gave way to disbelief, and soon, that disbelief turned into a powerful call for justice. The people of Kotam were not willing to accept the official story. They needed answers. Real answers. But it wasn't just the local community that was outraged. News of Sister Abaya's death spread quickly, sparking public outcry that extended far beyond the borders of the town. This was no longer just a local tragedy, it had become a symbol of something much larger. The people were beginning to suspect that Sister Abaya's death was more than a tragic loss. Was there a cover-up? Had justice been denied? At the forefront of this growing movement for justice was a passionate activist named Joan Pericles. Joan wasn't just another voice in the crowd. She became a leader, the heartbeat of the movement, demanding transparency and accountability. With a fierce determination, Joan rallied the community, organizing protests, vigils, and marches that echoed through the streets of Kotam. She demanded that the investigation be reopened, that the truth be uncovered, and that those responsible for any wrongdoing be held accountable, no matter how powerful they were. Joan's efforts quickly gained traction. Her fiery speeches and relentless dedication struck a chord with the people, inspiring many to stand up and fight alongside her. Rallies grew larger, and soon the movement was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the people of Kotam demanding justice anymore. This had become a national story. The media latched onto the case, sensing that there was more to this tragedy than met the eye. Journalists began digging into the details, questioning the original investigation and pointing out glaring inconsistencies. Why had the police ruled the death a suicide so quickly? Why were crucial pieces of evidence seemingly overlooked? With the media now involved, the pressure on the authorities began to mount. News outlets across the country scrutinized the handling of Sister Abaya's case, raising questions that the public had been asking for months. Journalists uncovered gaps in the investigation, pointing out that vital evidence appeared to have been ignored or mishandled. The suicide ruling, once accepted as the official conclusion, now seemed less like an answer and more like a hastily drawn cover-up. Day by day, the case became a focal point of national debate. Headlines splashed across newspapers and news segments carried reports on every new development. The media, once a passive observer, had become an active participant in the search for justice. As more inconsistencies were brought to light, the authorities could no longer remain silent. The public demanded to know the truth. Had someone within the convent or the church itself played a role in silencing Sister Abaya? Was there a conspiracy to cover up her death to protect powerful figures? The growing public outrage forced the authorities to act. Under immense pressure, the case was transferred from local investigators to the crime branch, a specialized team tasked with handling more complex investigations. For many, this decision marked a turning point, a glimmer of hope that perhaps, finally, the truth would emerge. The people of Kotam held their breath, hoping that the crime branch would uncover the real story behind Sister Abaya's death. Joan Pericle's movement wasn't just about one tragic case, it was about justice on a larger scale. The outrage over Sister Abaya's death sparked broader conversations about accountability and transparency, particularly within powerful institutions like the church. Joan's relentless pursuit of the truth resonated with others who had seen similar cases of injustice go unanswered. This wasn't just about a young nun's death. It was about ensuring that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. The rallies and marches continued, growing in size and intensity. The community, once paralyzed by grief, was now united in its pursuit of justice. The streets were filled with signs, chants, and prayers, each one a testament to Sister Abaya's memory and the collective demand for answers. Joan spoke passionately at every gathering, urging the people to keep pushing, to never give up until the truth was fully revealed. The movement gained momentum, and as it did, it brought more than just hope for justice. It brought awareness. Sister Abaya's case became a symbol of the need for institutional reform, highlighting the importance of holding those in power accountable. The conversations that Joan started went far beyond one case. They touched on the systemic issues that had allowed so many cases like Abaya's to be swept under the rug for years. With the crime branch now on the case and the entire nation watching, the question on everyone's mind was the same. Would this new investigation finally reveal the truth? Or would the forces working to keep this case buried succeed in silencing it once again? As the investigation deepened, the community could only hope that justice would finally prevail. But no one was prepared for the twists and turns that were yet to come. As the initial investigation into Sister Abaya's death continued to spiral into confusion and controversy, the demand for answers grew louder. The local authorities had already fumbled key parts of the case, and the public's trust was waning. It became clear that a fresh approach was needed. That turning point came with the involvement of the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, a powerful agency with the resources and expertise to handle cases that required a more thorough and nuanced examination. For the people of Kotam and those who had followed the case across the nation, the CBI's intervention was a sign of hope, a glimmer of light in a mystery that had grown darker with every passing year. But this wasn't going to be an easy case. The CBI faced the daunting task of re-examining a web of evidence that had already been mishandled and overlooked by previous investigators. The complexity of the case was undeniable. Sister Abaya's death had become more than just a local tragedy. It was a symbol of something much larger, something that demanded truth and accountability, no matter how difficult it was to find. The emotional weight of the investigation hung heavy over the CBI team. The people of Kotam, still grieving for their lost nun, desperately sought justice. The media, too, was relentless, amplifying every twist and turn in the investigation, and speculation ran wild. The entire country seemed to be watching, waiting for the CBI to deliver the answers that had eluded the original investigation. From the moment they stepped in, the CBI took a methodical and detailed approach to the case. Unlike the hasty conclusions reached by the local authorities, the CBI left no stone unturned. Investigators began revisiting witness statements, looking for any inconsistencies or overlooked details. Testimonies that had once seemed irrelevant were now scrutinized under a new lens. The forensic evidence was also re-examined, with a fresh set of eyes looking for anything that may have been missed during the initial investigation. The original autopsy findings, which had led to the controversial ruling of suicide, were now being questioned. Could there have been injuries that pointed to foul play? Did the authorities jump to conclusions in an effort to close the case quickly? Piece by piece, the CBI began to reconstruct the events leading up to Sister Abaya's death. But this was no ordinary investigation. The agency had to navigate not only the tangled web of evidence, but also the deeply rooted emotional and political implications surrounding the case. The community's faith in justice hung in the balance, and the CBI knew that every move they made was being watched closely. The investigation reached a critical moment when CBI officer Vargas P. Thomas held a surprising press conference. For weeks, there had been speculation about the direction of the case, with rumors swirling and the media constantly questioning whether the CBI would succeed where others had failed. The press conference marked a turning point, one that would capture the public's attention and ignite new hope for justice. Standing before a room filled with reporters, Officer Thomas revealed new insights that had not been previously explored. His calm but assertive tone hinted at potential leads that had emerged during the CBI's re-examination of the case. "We are pursuing all possible angles," he assured the nation, leaving many to wonder what had been uncovered behind closed doors. Thomas expressed the agency's firm commitment to uncovering the truth, no matter how long it took or who it implicated. The press conference sent a wave of hope through Sister Abaya's supporters. For the first time in years, it felt as though real progress was being made. Could the CBI be on the verge of solving the mystery that had plagued Kotam for so long? But with every step forward came a new wave of confusion. Conflicting narratives continued to dominate the public discourse, with some speculating that the CBI had stumbled upon a major conspiracy, while others remained skeptical that the investigation would ever uncover the full truth. The media was quick to jump on every new piece of information, feeding the public's insatiable curiosity. News outlets ran stories questioning whether the powerful figures suspected in the case would ever be held accountable. The tension in Kotam was palpable. Residents held their breath, waiting for the CBI to deliver the answers they so desperately needed. But as the days stretched on, the pressure on the CBI intensified. Would they be able to crack the case wide open, or would the investigation stall once again, leaving justice out of reach? For the CBI, the investigation was more than just a job. It was a mission. They knew they carried the weight of not only solving Sister Abaya's death, but also restoring faith in the justice system itself. Every piece of evidence they reviewed, every witness they interviewed, was done with the knowledge that the entire nation was watching, waiting, and hoping. The people of Kotam, though exhausted from years of unanswered questions, refused to give up hope. They had followed every step of the investigation, and they continued to stand behind the CBI's efforts, praying that this time, justice would be served. The memory of Sister Abaya had become a rallying point for those seeking the truth. Her legacy intertwined with the community's unyielding determination to find answers. But the case wasn't over yet. The investigation was still unfolding, and as the CBI pushed deeper into the evidence, the truth began to emerge, one shocking revelation at a time. The public's patience was wearing thin, but the end of this long and painful journey was finally within sight. Yet, even as hope grew, so did the tension. The CBI was closing in on something that could change everything. But what would they find? And who would be implicated? As the investigation reached its final stages, one thing became clear. Sister Abaya's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was the key to exposing a much darker truth. The investigation into Sister Abaya's death had already taken numerous twists and turns, but none were as unexpected or as pivotal as the testimony of Adhikar Raju. Raju was no saint. He had a reputation in the community as a petty thief, a man used to slipping in and out of the shadows unnoticed. But one night, those very shadows held secrets he could no longer keep to himself. Raju came forward with a claim that would shake the investigation to its core. On the night of Sister Abhaya's death, he had witnessed suspicious activity near the convent. His account described seeing figures moving in the early hours, figures that should not have been there. What had they been doing? And more importantly, what had they seen? Raju's testimony suggested that foul play might have been involved, a revelation that reignited hope within the community. Could it be that Sister Abaya's death was not the suicide authorities had so swiftly declared it to be? Was there more to this tragic story than anyone had previously imagined? For the people of Kotam, Raju's account was a lifeline. It pointed to the possibility of finally uncovering the truth, of piecing together the mysterious events that had taken place on that fateful night. But as with all revelations in this case, Raju's decision to come forward came with heavy consequences. Adhikar Raju was no stranger to danger, but stepping into the light with his testimony put him at risk in ways he had never experienced before. His past as a thief made him an easy target for dismissal and doubt. Would anyone believe a man with such a tainted history? And even more ominously, what would the powerful individuals implicated in his testimony do to silence him? Raju knew full well that his decision to speak out could provoke a backlash, not only from the authorities, but from those who had the most to lose if the truth came to light. But despite the very real threats he faced, Raju was driven by a deep sense of moral obligation. He may have been a thief, but when it came to Sister Abhaya's death, he couldn't remain silent. This was a matter of justice, something far greater than his own fears or reputation. Raju understood that by staying silent, he would be allowing a grave injustice to go unanswered. His decision to step forward was not just about clearing his conscience, it was about seeking justice for a life lost too soon. Raju's courage in coming forward underscored the complexities of this case. Here was a man with a troubled past, risking everything to tell the truth. His testimony became a powerful turning point, highlighting the delicate balance between crime, faith, and the search for truth in a community still grappling with loss and uncertainty. It was a pivotal moment in the ongoing investigation, but one that would only deepen the complexities of the case as a whole. But just when it seemed as though Raju's testimony might shed new light on Sister Abhaya's death, the investigation took a shocking and devastating turn. Rather than being hailed as a key witness, Raju found himself accused of the very crime he had come forward to help solve. Authorities, it seemed, were more interested in discrediting him than in investigating his claims. The community was left bewildered. How could a man who had stepped forward to provide crucial information now find himself at the center of blame? It was a turn of events that no one had expected, and it was about to get much worse. During his detention, Raju faced unspeakable treatment at the hands of the authorities. Instead of being questioned for his insights, he was subjected to brutal torture, an attempt to extract a confession that would fit the narrative the police had already built. The goal was simple: force Raju to align his story with their version of events, to make him retract his testimony and implicate himself in a crime he didn't commit. But Raju, battered and bruised, refused to break. He stood by his truth, even as the pressure on him mounted. Raju's treatment at the hands of the authorities revealed a much darker side of the investigation. It wasn't just about uncovering the truth, it was about controlling the narrative. The lengths to which the police went to silence Raju highlighted the systemic corruption, and manipulation that had plagued the investigation from the very beginning. The question now wasn't just who had killed Sister Abhaya, but why so many were willing to go to such extreme lengths to keep the truth buried. Raju's courage in the face of such overwhelming odds became emblematic of the broader fight for justice. As news of his ordeal spread, the community rallied behind him. What had started as a movement for Sister Abaya was now also a fight for Raju. A fight against corruption, against intimidation, and against the powerful forces that seemed determined to keep the truth from emerging. Despite the physical and emotional toll he endured, Raju refused to waver. His resolve became a beacon of hope for the community, a reminder that no matter how dark things seemed, there were still those willing to stand up for what was right. His plight mirrored the broader struggle for truth in a case that had become marred by deceit, manipulation, and obstruction. Raju's story wasn't just about a single act of bravery. It was a testament to the power of standing up to injustice, even when it feels like the entire system is stacked against you. His decision to come forward reignited the community's determination to seek the truth about Sister Abaya's death, giving them the strength to keep pushing forward in their quest for justice. But as the community rallied behind Raju, the question still lingered. Would his testimony be enough to crack the case wide open? Or would the forces working to bury the truth succeed in silencing him once and for all? The investigation had taken a dramatic turn, but the fight was far from over. As the search for justice continued, it became clear that Sister Abaya's death wasn't just a mystery. It was a battle for truth, one that was far from being won. As the investigation into Sister Abaya's mysterious death deepened, two names emerged from the shadows: Father Thomas Couture and Father Jose Puri Kail. Both men were powerful figures within the religious community, closely connected to the St. Pius X convent where Sister Abaya had lived. With their influence and respected positions, few had dared to suspect them at first. But as the evidence began to mount, the focus of the investigation shifted toward these two priests, raising unsettling questions about what had truly happened the night Sister Abaya died. It was the testimony of a neighbor that first cast suspicion on Father Couture. According to the witness, Father Couture had been seen near the convent on the night of Sister Abaya's death, an unusual sight for such late hours. What was he doing there? And why had this detail not surfaced earlier in the investigation? The sighting prompted investigators to take a closer look at Father Couture's actions during that critical time frame. As they dug deeper, more troubling information came to light. Whispers began to circulate about a possible inappropriate relationship between Father Couture and Sister Sephi, another nun at the convent. These rumors, though unconfirmed, cast a dark shadow over the investigation, suggesting that there might have been more going on behind the convent's closed doors than anyone had realized. Could this clandestine connection have played a role in Sister Abaya's tragic fate? Had she discovered something she wasn't supposed to, putting herself in harm's way? The community was rife with speculation. In a place where trust in the church was woven into daily life, these rumors struck at the very heart of faith. People began to wonder, was Sister Abaya's death not an isolated tragedy, but rather the result of hidden dynamics within the convent itself. The scrutiny on Father Couture, Father Kyle, and the church as a whole intensified as more questions were raised about what secrets might have been lurking behind the religious facade. The investigation took a controversial and dramatic turn when the decision was made to subject the key suspects to narco tests, a form of interrogation where subjects are placed under sedation in the hopes of eliciting truthful responses. For Father Couture, Father Kail, and Sister Safi, these tests were meant to unlock the truth behind the mysterious events of that night. At first, the narco tests seemed like a breakthrough. Investigators believed that under sedation, the suspects might reveal the answers that had eluded them for so long. But just as hope began to build, the integrity of the investigation was once again thrown into doubt. Allegations surfaced that the test results, captured on CDs, had been tampered with. Reports indicated that critical recordings had been altered, or worse, destroyed. The implications of such tampering were devastating. Could it be that someone within the system had orchestrated a cover-up? The possibility that powerful figures were working behind the scenes to protect the suspects cast a dark shadow over the entire case. The very tools meant to uncover the truth had become tainted, and once again, the public was left wondering whether justice would ever be served. The court responded swiftly to the allegations of tampering, demanding a thorough investigation into the mishandling of the evidence. This new layer of controversy only heightened the scrutiny on the police and investigative agencies involved in the case. The integrity of the entire investigation hung in the balance. Would the truth behind Sister Abaya's death finally be revealed, or would it be buried under layers of corruption and deceit? Despite the swirling controversy, the results of the narco tests eventually came to light, and what they revealed was more shocking than anyone had anticipated. According to the testimonies obtained during the tests, Sister Abaya had inadvertently stumbled upon something that could have cost her life. A compromising situation involving Father Thomas Couture, Father Jose Pericail, and Sister Safi. The details were grim. The tests suggested that the three were involved in a clandestine relationship, one that Sister Abaya had unwittingly discovered. Fearing that she might expose their secret, they allegedly confronted her, leading to a violent altercation. In the struggle that followed, Sister Abaya sustained fatal head injuries. Rather than face the consequences of their actions, the suspects had attempted to cover up the crime. Her body was disposed of in the convent well, and the scene was staged to make it appear as though she had drowned. The implications of these revelations were profound. For nearly 3 decades, the truth had been hidden behind layers of lies and manipulation. The suspects had gone to great lengths to protect their secrets, even as the community mourned the loss of a young woman who had devoted her life to God. The narco tests painted a picture of betrayal, one that revealed the depths of the deceit that had plagued the investigation from the beginning. When the truth finally began to surface, the community was left reeling. The people of Kotam had long suspected that something was amiss, but the reality of what had transpired was even more shocking than they had imagined. The revelations reignited the demand for justice, this time with renewed urgency. No longer was this simply a case of solving a murder. It had become a battle to hold those in power accountable for their actions. The case now stood as a symbol of the need for transparency, not just within the investigation itself, but within the larger structures of power that had allowed such a cover-up to take place. The people of Kotam were no longer willing to accept the silence of those in authority. They demanded answers. They demanded justice. But even as the truth began to unravel, the question remained, would the full story ever be revealed? Or would more forces conspire to keep parts of the mystery buried forever? The quest for justice for Sister Abaya was far from over. With every new revelation came the reminder that this case was not just about one tragic death, but about the larger fight for truth in a system that had so often failed to provide it. The investigation had uncovered shocking truths, but the fight for justice was not yet won. Would those responsible for Sister Abaya's death be held accountable? Or would more powerful figures step in to protect their own? As the legal proceedings unfolded, one thing was clear. This case had exposed more than just a murder. It had revealed the darkness hiding within the very institutions meant to uphold faith and trust. Following the explosive revelations from the narco tests, the legal proceedings surrounding Sister Abaya's murder case gained unstoppable momentum. The courtroom became a battleground, with the eyes of the entire nation watching closely. For years, the public had demanded justice for the young nun whose death had been shrouded in secrecy and betrayal. Now at last, the truth was on the verge of being revealed. As the hearings unfolded over several months, the testimonies and evidence were examined with intense scrutiny. Every word, every document, and every witness was weighed carefully as the court tried to piece together the final puzzle of Sister Abhaya's death. The proceedings were no longer just about a single tragedy. They were about exposing the deep, dark undercurrents that had plagued the investigation from the very start. And the public, united in their demand for justice, watched each development closely. The most significant testimony came from Adakar Raju, the man who had risked everything to speak the truth. His account had been critical in unraveling the lies that had concealed the true events of that fateful night. Raju's courage in coming forward had been met with immense personal risk, but he never wavered. His testimony helped lay bare the sinister secrets that those in power had fought so hard to keep hidden. Finally, after years of legal battles and public outcry, the court reached a monumental decision. There was enough evidence to charge Father Thomas Couture and Sister Sephi with murder. The trial that followed was one of the most highly anticipated in the country's history, a symbol of the battle between truth and corruption. In 2020, after nearly 3 decades of waiting, justice was finally served. Father Couture and Sister Sephi were sentenced to life imprisonment, marking a pivotal moment in the long and arduous quest for truth. The verdict brought a sense of closure, not only to Sister Abaya's grieving family, but to the entire community that had fought so hard to uncover what really happened that night. But the impact of the court's decision reached far beyond this single case. The sentencing of Father Couture and Sister Sephi wasn't just about punishing those responsible for Sister Abaya's death. It was about sending a powerful message. The culture of silence and impunity within religious institutions had been exposed for what it was, a system that had allowed corruption and abuse to go unchecked for far too long. This verdict stood as a bold statement. No one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. For Sister Abhaya's family and supporters, the verdict was a bittersweet victory. While nothing could ever bring her back, knowing that those responsible for her murder were finally held accountable brought a measure of peace. The court's decision also ignited a wave of hope within the broader community, particularly for those who had experienced similar injustices. Sister Abaya's case became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, truth and justice could prevail. At the heart of this victory was Raju's testimony. His bravery and resilience had played a crucial role in achieving this outcome. By standing up to corruption, even when it meant putting his own life at risk, Raju had proven that speaking out against wrongdoing was not only necessary but possible. His story became an inspiration to others, a reminder that no matter how deep the corruption runs, there will always be those who refuse to let the truth be buried. Sister Abaya's case is more than just the story of a murder. It's a poignant reminder of the importance of justice in the face of tragedy. Her life, which was marked by devotion and service, was cut short in the most brutal of ways. But her death, and the long fight to uncover the truth, highlighted the complexities surrounding faith, power, and accountability within institutions that hold immense influence. The investigation, which spanned nearly 30 years, revealed deep-seated issues of corruption and secrecy that plagued not just this case, but countless others like it. The conviction of Father Thomas Couture and Sister Sifi in 2020 wasn't just a legal victory. It was a symbol of the need for transparency and reform within religious institutions. For too long, these systems had operated with little accountability, and the damage done to innocent lives had been immeasurable. As we reflect on the intricacies of this case, it's essential to consider the broader implications it holds for society. The fight for truth and justice isn't just about resolving one tragedy. It's about addressing the systemic flaws that allow such tragedies to occur in the first place. The courage of individuals like Adhakar Raju, who bravely testified despite facing immense pressure, underscores the vital role that truth-telling plays in the pursuit of justice. Without his testimony, the full truth behind Sister Abhaya's death might never have been revealed. Sister Abaya's case may have found its resolution in the courtroom, but the fight for justice and reform continues. Her story is a reminder that the pursuit of truth must never be silenced, no matter the forces working against it.
And we invite you to be part of this ongoing mission. If this story resonated with you, if it opened your eyes to the importance of justice and transparency, we ask that you subscribe to our channel. By liking this video and sharing it with others, you help raise awareness about these critical issues, ensuring that stories like Sister Abhaya's continue to inspire change. Together, we can ensure that the fight for truth doesn't end here, because justice isn't just about one case. It's about changing the system for the better.